So this morning, I am delighted to have David Baker with us. David is one of the chaplains in our synod. He is an ELCA pastor, has worked as a chaplain. And David, I'm excited to have some conversation this morning.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, David, you had wanted to share a little bit about some of the key relationships that we need for spiritual health. So I'm excited to hear more about this.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Part of, I think, every pastor's repertoire or arsenal of tools and equipment is to have a significant number of relationships with people who provide certain kinds of feedback to us. Some of it is skills and competency kinds of things. Others are more intimate, more personal in terms of our own spiritual, emotional well-being. What kinds of things help us to know who we are and to help us continue to focus on our life's mission and purpose. So what I'm hoping to do is share with the group some material that we were hoping to present at one of our Healthy Leader workshops that were scheduled last April. This was part of an all-day workshop, and we were hoping to inform pastors about the various relationships and raise awareness of the importance of that. Bishop Gould has been very good about identifying that he himself needs some significant people in his life. He has, I believe, a spiritual director. I believe he has a mentor. I think he has a coach, those kinds of things. And that's all excellent and great. We wanted to build on that and suggest that there may be some additional kinds of relationships and some resources that certain kinds of people can give us to help us be whole, to help us be spiritually well. Part of where we're coming from, there was a book published in 2015 by a man named Jimmy Dodd entitled Survive or Thrive. And Jimmy Dodd is a pastor who has created an organization called PastorServe. He's out in Oklahoma. And he has been serving pastors for, the last 10 or 15 years, providing spiritual, emotional care and counsel to pastors and congregations who are struggling with particular issues. And his observation and conclusion is that pastors need at least 6 key relationships in their life in order to function well and to remain spiritually whole and sound. He talks about the metaphor of the stage, the theater stage, where you have a front stage and a backstage. And what he's saying is that the front stage for pastors is the public side, the part that the audience sees. And this includes, the pastor's preaching ability, his teaching ability, his leadership ability, the kinds of things that the congregation sees and looks at and affirms and celebrates and so on. But there's also a backstage side of the pastor, where you have the personal identity of the pastor. On a theater stage, you have wonderful productions going on out front, where everything seems to be flowing together and everything is working, and the congregation or the audience is feeling blessed and pleased and enjoying the performance. But behind stage, there's often a lot of chaos and confusion as people are running about and trying to get things ready for the next scene, as people are struggling to remember their lines, et cetera, et cetera. And on the personal side, then, we see pastors struggling with their identity, struggling with their faith, struggling to kind of keep it all together, and often feeling very disconnected from the public persona that they present. And so we hopefully would like to see pastors aware of the incongruities between their front stage and their backstage performances, so that hopefully they can focus on what it is in their backstage, in their personal identity, that needs support and encouragement, challenges, confrontation, feedback, and so on, that enables them to really perform well on the front stage, you might say. And Jimmy Dodd has identified 6 key relationships that he feels that we need pastors to be able to perform at our best. And I think as a Lutheran Christian pastor, I can maybe even use some different metaphors, and we'll get to that a little later, as to what our language, what are kind of key roles that we need to have people playing in our life in order to keep us whole and spiritually healthy.
That image of the stage, absolutely, I think that's a great metaphor. I can certainly think about how that would apply to my own life.
One of the challenges of pastors is to balance the backstage and the front stage of being congruent between our professional persona and our own personal life. And one of the things that happens to a lot of pastors is we become aware of how our own personal backstage life does not look at all like our front stage, and that there's an awful lot of fear and anxiety tied in with that, and that we tend to become aware of our shortcomings and our weaknesses, and sometimes then we double up in trying to work even harder trying to perform for our people, and that results in a rather unsustainable, exhausting effort to protect our public persona. We're going to be this super pastor whatever it takes, even though we're going crazy in the background and are putting an awful lot of effort and energy into the whole process. Part of that, I think, is fostered and nurtured by the congregation itself. Pastors are expected to be perfect, and I think congregations often place an unrealistic job description on pastors and have unrealistic expectations. I think we see it also in the synod level, where we have bishops and assistants to the bishops. We somehow expect them to always be available, to always be there for us, and not recognizing that they have other obligations and other commitments. So when pastors buy into that belief that somehow they should be all things to all people, they're not able to allow themselves to really acknowledge their weakness or to admit their brokenness and to conclude that they just don't always have what it takes. I was impressed at the Synod Assembly when our bishop, as part of his public address, acknowledged and asked for forgiveness for his inability to be all things to all people at all times, to not always be on his best game for folks. And I think that was a good role model for those of us who are pastors who are saying, yes, there are times when I'm not emotionally, mentally, physically able to be fully present with people, and how I need to recognize that sometimes even my best efforts fall short, and at other times, maybe I just have other priorities, or my own personal life is just so confused or conflicted or even just full of healthy things that I'm not always able to be available. And so part of this collusion that seems to go on between congregations and professional church leaders is that the pastor is kind of seduced into being a professional pretender, always trying to present the image that we're all together, and living in terror of being found out, of never really allowing anyone to glimpse into the real self of who I am. And that collusion, I think, keeps pastors isolated from others. You go to some synod conference meetings, and people aren't really vulnerable with each other. Everyone is talking about what good things are happening in their parish and the success and motivation and all the good things happening. And it's not really inviting, that sense of competition isn't really inviting pastors to acknowledge that they're struggling with professional issues or personal issues. And part of that, I think, is tied into an illusion that it's by our own efforts somehow God brings about his kingdom. And when we think that we're that key component, that God can't build his kingdom without our efforts, and then we end up feeling it's all on ourselves, that we're forced into this, as I said, this unsustainable, exhausting effort to protect our public persona, that we just really, really run and scramble. And that results in kind of really boxing ourselves into a prison of isolation or fear or doubt and often shame that many pastors just can't seem to break out of. And so we protect ourselves by posing and pretending in ways that ultimately leaves us feeling disconnected from our real self, and it leaves us feeling often phony and empty and deceptive in our stuff. And I myself have seen that in my preaching, where I've been saying one thing from the pulpit with great authority and boldness, and then on my private times questioning and wondering and then feeling very phony and stuff like that. So one wonders about how much do you allow people to glimpse at the inner side of you. But at any rate, I think this tension, this prison that we build around ourselves in trying to protect our public persona and somewhat protecting our private side of ourselves results in a lot of frankly dropout from ministry. There's a lot of data that shows that something like up to 50% of pastors drop out in the first 5 years of ministry. And I also think it goes on that for many of those who continue on in ministry, that there's a kind of a chronic malaise or a chronic burnout and almost an apathetic disillusionment of many pastors who remain. And I know many pastors in their late 50s and 60s who are just kind of counting down because they've been carrying this dissonance within them of who they are and what they should be for so long, and they're just kind of marking time until they can finally hang it up and say, enough already, I'm out of the game altogether. And that's sad for them, and I think it does a disservice to the church as a whole.
It strikes me that part of that disservice is even as a leader then you're presenting an image to the folks that you lead in a congregation that we all have to be that way.
Right.
And of course, the converse then, if we are an open, authentic, some more transparent leader, then that can help others it'll model for them as well.
Right, right. And I think part of that has to do with an idea that sort of, and it's not grace-oriented, okay, it's very law-oriented,
Yeah.
that we are, somehow we need to prove ourselves to God or believe that God can't use us as broken vessels. And I think if you look at most of the people in Scripture that God used were broken and humble people who were not maybe the first choice, you would say. Paul talks about how, he started off as being this great rabbi and then ends up ultimately saying, I'm the chief of sinners, I think that was Luther that said that. But anyway, Paul basically, is acknowledging that he really does not have what it takes, and yet somehow God was using his weakness and his brokenness to bring about his kingdom. And I think the fear we have is to be authentic with people. You're right, that we don't want to acknowledge our own limitations and weaknesses, and we're terrified that other people are going to see those and somehow think less of us or not work with us. And there's probably some truth to that, because I think if we go up and say to the congregation, I don't know how to lead you, that would probably not be met with a good response. On the other hand, it probably theoretically could lead to a process where the congregation could work with the pastor to create a shared vision of what the congregation should be doing and about, where we could work together. I think the biblical metaphor is that the pastor is kind of the spear that launches he's the spear thrower that kind of launches the congregation into ministry, that he's the one who equips and sustains them for doing ministry. But so many congregations turn it around and see him sort of as the pitchfork that they all wield to do all the hard work. And pastors, I think, buy into that and are either not willing or are afraid that, I'm not sure what exactly, I don't have the piece to that, but to that end, then, we need significant key relationships in our life to help remind us of who we are and to give us not only the skills and competencies, but the humility and the self-awareness to know that we are limited, and yet God can still use us in our limitations. So let me talk a little bit now about the relationships that Jimmy Dodd talks about that we need for our professional side, the public persona that we throw. He talks essentially about how we need a boss, a trainer, and a coach. And by boss, he means someone who is to whom we are accountable. That we all need either a senior pastor or a church council or maybe a mutual ministry committee or maybe even our bishop, or depending on the denominational structure. We need someone to whom we can be accountable. Otherwise, we're off on our own tangent, and we may or may not be doing what is best for the congregation or ourselves or whatever ministry we're choosing to. So we need someone that can give us some feedback that says, yes, this is our shared goal, and yes, you're on target, or no, you're not, and how can we reorganize you a little bit. Sometimes we get full of ourselves, and we can be self-aggrandizing, we can be selfish and self-interested, and we want to take credit for all this stuff. And sometimes we need a boss to kind of remind us that it's not just all about us, and that they and God are a part of the mix as well. So we need a boss. We need someone to give us that kind of feedback. One of the crucial relationships that that there's been some research looked at, a study done by the leadership development out of St. Louis years ago. They did a survey of 1,050 pastors, and they found that about 75% or more of them who were surveyed felt they were unqualified and poorly trained by their seminaries to lead and manage the church or to counsel others. I think that's kind of the reality that most of us discovered in our first call, that we were just overwhelmed by all the needs and all the things we didn't know that we needed to function well.
Of course, the ones that worry me would be the 25% that actually think they do.
Yeah.
I would think it'd be 100%.
Yeah. Well, I think, we all come out of it thinking, my gosh, I should have had a class on that, or you had a little mini course on pastoral care, and you suddenly realize the complexity of that whole challenge, or church leadership, or how to deal with just the culture and the context of a particular parish, and how to navigate that, how to understand that, and how to maybe try to affect change in that entrenched culture. So anyway, a lot of pastors end up feeling rather discouraged and overwhelmed. And so part of one of the crucial relationships we need is a trainer, someone who can provide ongoing, lifelong kind of education. And here we're not talking about an individual, but we're basically saying as the pastor recognizes his or her shortcomings, he or she needs to be doing ongoing education, continuing education. They need to be reading. They need to be going to workshops. They need to be consulting our church leader tools that you're putting together. They need to be finding resources to help them become more effective in leadership, more effective in pastoral care, more effective in discipleship and evangelism. That's an important piece, that continuing education didn't stop when you graduated from seminary, but really is just the beginning of it. It's kind of your graduation into, I'm trying to think of the word, matriculation, when you graduate from high school or college. That's really the starting point, that now you begin to mature and to figure out really how to hone those skills and find the kinds of training you need to meet those needs.
Of course, as we come out of seminary, that's part of that as well. But of course, the world is changing so fast that there's that constant need to continue to train on what the new directions are. So, that's even more a part of that. I think that the world is changing so fast. We got to keep up in order to be ready for the new world we're entering.
Right, and that's an excellent point. And then tied in with that is that we need, he suggests, as a coach, someone who can kind of help us deal with an identified set of skills maybe that we need to learn or develop, that eventually helps us to become improved and hopefully perform much better in terms of those particular areas. And coaching, like, training is an ongoing, lifelong thing as we discover new things about how do we minister in the ever-changing world. Coaching is more specific and may look at a particular area and functioning for a year, where you would work with a mentor, or not a mentor, but a coach, someone who may look at, for example, just trying to clarify what exactly you want to do. Let's say you're looking at preaching. How do you identify your shortfalls? How do you get feedback on that? How do you identify the kind of core skills and competencies maybe that you need to be addressing? How do you put language around those to allow you to talk about those? And then come up with some mutually agreed upon strategies to how do I improve that skill? How do I improve that competency? And then, of course, there needs to be a commitment. You can have the best coach in the world, but if you don't utilize him or her, if you're not committed to that change and that growth, then you're going to stay stuck. But hopefully by having an openness to ongoing training and an openness to work with a particular coach at a particular time in your life around a particular issue, that can create then a healthy, realistic way of improving and enhancing those skills. So again, all those things are really kind of necessary. Those three roles, the boss, the trainer, the coach, all that is important for maintaining our professional competencies and skills, that front stage kind of things that we need. But importantly, I think more importantly, because I think most pastors are functioning and trying to maintain that professional skills and competency stuff. The harder thing, I think, is the backstage stuff, where we need to be doing the hard work of discerning and rediscerning who we are and where God is calling us, and how do we how do we put it all together so that we can be emotionally, spiritually, mentally equipped to do that front stage kind of work. And Dodd talks about how we really need three different roles rather, that equip us to do that. He said we all need a counselor, we all need a mentor, we all need a good friend. And by counselor, he meant that many of us, and probably most of us, who go into ministry have wounds at some deep level, perhaps by a parent, perhaps by friends. We've been betrayed or hurt somehow. We've been abused perhaps by congregations or persons in congregations, or we've been traumatized by our own failures and so on. And as a result of that, we can be suffering from hopelessness and fear and doubt and anxiety and depression and so on. So we need occasionally to consult with someone on the outside, a counselor who can give us some new insight into who we are and to kind of look together with us, to journey with us at looking at some of those wounds. It's almost a medical model here. If you have a wound, let's say a boil or something, you need to open it up. You need to cut it open and you need to scrub out that poison that's in there and to address those untreated infected wounds, because otherwise they're not going to heal and they're going to be there forever, and they may end up poisoning our whole system and our whole well-being. And so what the counselor does is it provides a safe context and a safe person in which one can process those wounds, to kind of scrub out those poison areas and hopefully get some healing and wholeness that will allow them. And essentially what the counselor is saying is, you're not alone. Let me do this with you, and provides the context to do that. One of the problems with pastors and mental health professionals is that often we're thinking, look, I know what's going on. I understand myself. I don't need to reach out. I don't need to be vulnerable to someone else who maybe has the ability to see through me. And so it's hard to acknowledge that we need this kind of help, but we all do.
The metaphor that I often use, and I'm sure many pastors have had that conversation with a parishioner, of encouraging them to go to counseling. We just have to take that same advice ourselves. The metaphor I often use is, I don't fix my own car because I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't do surgery on myself because I don't know how to do it. I go to a counselor because they have a level of skill that I do not, and I go to them for that help because they're skilled at it, and I can't do it by myself.
And one of the challenges, I think, for pastors is often, who do we go to? The spiritual mental health counselor that we would feel safe with. And I know in staff ministries, sometimes there's a temptation for staff to want to turn to the senior pastor for help, and sometimes the senior pastor saying, well, let me be your counselor. But I think that that's not wise in many ways, that it's better to find perhaps another local pastor, maybe even someone in a different denomination, or certainly a person, a professional counselor, someone apart from your own context. Part of the dilemma, if we turn to our bishops or our assistants to the bishops or even our deans, would be that these people aren't necessarily safe, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. One of the challenges of being a person in a position of authority who is working with their staff or a subordinate in some way is that, one, the staff person may not feel safe to talk about that. They really need to find someone who's outside of the system, someone who can be objective, who doesn't care whether you succeed or fail in your ministry, someone who isn't in a position where they can discipline you or challenge you or even abort your whole career. So you need to find a safe person. And similarly, I think it's wise in staff relationships that senior leaders would invite their subordinates to go and find someone else. I currently consult with a local congregation, a multiple staff situation, where the senior pastor has felt it wisely that they are not able to provide this kind of care to their staff, and a couple of years ago said, I need an outside safe person that's kind of neutral. And so I have been meeting monthly with their staff and allowing them to process issues even involving the senior pastor, to allow them an avenue, a venue to process some of their issues, and as a group and also then individually on other occasions, to have that safe environment to process with a counselor who can provide some support.
I've done that myself, where I've just taken the entire staff, particularly in the midst of a crisis, and say, we're all going to go to a counselor, again, to get that really good advice that we need. You're right, that's outside of our system.
Yeah, and we can feel safe. I think that's the safety is the issue. We're not going to talk about our vulnerability if we think it's going to be either used against us or somehow will compromise our current or future career. It's just not realistic. So I think senior pastors or others who have staff situations really do need to be wise enough to say, look, I'm not the right one to do this, even though I may have the skills and I may have the competency. This isn't going to work because of the relationships. Just like counselors don't counsel their family members or physicians don't treat themselves, we need to find the outside resource. Another role I think that God mentions is that we all need some sort of mentor, someone who is probably a professional, maybe in the same career, someone who's also someone we trust, a friend, kind of all wrapped up into one. I was sharing recently, I have a friend who is a retired psychologist that I've known for close to 30 years, and I would say he is my mentor. He is the one who has shown me his life, and I've seen his mistakes and some of his vulnerability, and he mine, and he has been kind of a sort of a father figure. Dutch uncle may not be the right metaphor, but the one who has been able to show me how he has used his strengths and skills and resources and wisdom and intellect and life experience to kind of help me see how he did it. And that has allowed me not only a lifelong friendship of trust and openness, but has been a confidant and someone that I could go and ask about a situation whenever I need it. And that is a real gift. And I think we all need that kind of mentor. I think our synod used to provide mentors for newly ordained persons. I don't know if they still do that. Do you know, Stuart?
I'm not sure myself, no.
But there was a time when they provided, I think, for the first couple of years of ordination, mentors who would be kind of just a veteran pastor who could share his or her experience and say, I did that, and here's where I screwed up, so maybe you might want to try something different. But we all need a mentor. We all need those. Yeah.
When I was newly ordained, I was assigned one, and I could still tell you things that he said and stories that he told that have impacted my ministry. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we need those kinds of people in our life. And then the last thing that Dodds points out is that we need a friend, someone who can be there loving you forever. And I think it's the friend who, as much as anything, allows us to narrow the distance between our front stage performance, our perception, and the backstage reality of who we are. And I think, God has created us as people who need community, and we all need those significant relationships in our life, those friendships in our life that allows us to understand ourselves and to understand the roles we play. And I think not just one person can do that. We need, I think, a whole group of friends or persons in these different roles. I forget who it was who says it takes a village to keep us sane, but we can't be fully known by one person necessarily, and we can't fully know one person. But I think in the context of having several key relationships around us, we can be whole and well. We can have a better understanding of ourselves. We can reach out and access those resources we need when we need them. One of the problems, I think, with many pastors is we are reluctant to share our vulnerability. And I think often many pastors don't have real friends. Pastoring is lonely and life can be hard. And if we don't have a circle of friends that can just love us as we are, and regardless of the role they're playing, we need significant people around us who can walk with us and let us know we're not alone, that love us as we are. And that's the good news we preach every Sunday, that God is with us. But sometimes God needs to have flesh on him. And Jesus isn't always available in the flesh for us. So he dresses us with friends that surround us, that enable us to know we're not alone, that people can work with us. And one of the things that I'm excited about in our synod is that we have this friend, you might say, that the synod is lifting up in the form of the Healthy Leader Chaplains. That there are some of us who have been appointed to support and assist pastors in finding resources to work with them, to enable them to be fully who they are. A friend that can walk with them, who can be there for them, who is not going to have any authority, with whom one can talk confidentially and know that nothing is going to change, that it's not going to threaten their career or their moves and so on. In our synod, as a result of developing these healthy leadership chaplains, of which I'm one, has enabled us to reach out to many pastors in our synod and provide that friendship so that they don't have to feel alone, and to perhaps assist them in their journey to know that there is someone who accepts them as they are. And I think that's a real gift, because for those pastors who have trapped themselves in a prison of, my gosh, I can't let them know how I'm failing inside and how I feel so terrified and so empty and so helpless, we can walk alongside of that person and say, I understand, and you're not alone, and hopefully help them journey through those difficult times and enable them to move past it and to regain hope. Sometimes we just need a confessor, so to speak. I think Luther was real big into that. But someone who understands us and still loves us. And is it Stopowitz, Luther's, his confessor, occasionally would say, Luther, all you need is to go get a good night's rest and a good meal. Mm-hmm. And somehow, the next day the world seems so much different. So I'm happy to serve the Synod in that role. We have some others that work with us. And if people are interested in finding a healthy leader chaplain, they can go to the Synod website. They can look under the resource tab, and there they'll find healthy leader chaplains and our names and phone numbers, and you're able to access it. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to not only advertise and promote in this talk, but also to remind people that we do have many roles to play. And we have many opportunities to have support from various persons that can enable us to perform well and have competency, but also to affirm ourselves and to let us be congruent between who we are and what we profess to be. The primary way that we deal with the future, I think, is to attend to the quality of our relationships, to have people around us that we can call on when we need them. And we may not need these 6 kinds of relationships. We may not need to have persons in each of those 6 roles, or we may have 20 people serving in those roles. I think that what I'm trying to suggest here is that we all need to have the grace within us to reach out and find those relationships so that we can equip ourselves to not only love and accept ourselves as we are, but to have the skills and the competencies to lead as the church leaders that we are.
Well, I know, David, as you were talking and as I was viewing the PowerPoint, it occurred to me, it challenged me to think, well, some of those I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm doing pretty well in that area, and other ones, I don't have that, and I need that. Even if the folks who listen just think, okay, of those 6, which one do I need to work on now? And right. Develop that a little bit, not try and fit all 6 in, but just, okay, which of those are the one that I need most at this particular point in my leadership journey, and to develop and grow that a little bit more. That would be a huge blessing, I think.
Right. One of this set of slides in this lecture was really a part of our Synod workshop on resiliency, and one of the tasks at that workshop would have been to have pastors or rostered professionals who are there to look at which relationships do they need to establish at this time. Where do you need to encourage or increase your circle of relationships, and to maybe write down a plan of care of how I'm going to go about finding these persons. And then actually what we were going to have people do is to write out this plan and address it to themselves, and we were going to actually mail the letter back to people to kind of remind them, hey, did you do this? Did you find these persons? Because we just function so much better when we have those kind of resource persons around us. I've been a clinical pastor educator for a number of years, and one of the tools we do or use in the whole CPE process is the Johari window, in which we look at perhaps you've seen it or have done it yourself, but it's a metaphor or a means of identifying that we have parts of ourselves that we know and that other people know, and that we have parts of ourselves that other people know and we don't know. And ultimately what we discover is that there are areas in our life where we have blind spots, where we honestly don't see who we are and how we're functioning, and we need people around us to give us that kind of feedback. We also have blind spots. We also have unknown areas in our life that we need people to help us to identify together, that we can begin to further enhance who we are as individuals, that we bless each other as we have relationships with each other, and whenever we dialogue, whenever we interact with another human being, we get new images and new perceptions of ourselves, and it helps to clarify our world. So I guess my takeaway would be that I hope pastors who listen to this have the courage to reach out and to find these relationships. It's not something that we sort of mandate that people need to have, although I wish we could, but it's really a grace opportunity to take advantage, to give ourselves permission to have these kinds of intimate relationships with people that will enable us to know ourselves better and to have the courage and the strength and the energy to go forward to do the ministry God calls us to do.
Amen. From your lips to folks' hearts. Amen.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to share, and I again continue to congratulate you on developing the church leadership tools. This is a real gift to our synod, and I thank you for your leadership in that.
Absolutely. This will be an excellent addition to them. Thank you so much, David.
You're very welcome.
Take care. God bless.